What do a letter of dereliction from General Eisenhower, a French countess serving mulled wine, and the Battle of the Bulge in 1944 all have in common? Well, it's Colonel retired Herb Stern. Herbert Irving Stern was born on Christmas Eve, 1918 in Baltimore. By 9, he knew he wanted to go to West Point. After a senator broke a promise of appointment, Herb earned his spot through a competitive exam and reported to the academy in the summer of 1937. He graduated the class in 1941 as a cadet sergeant, and within months, the country was at war. He became an artilleryman. He never attended the basic course, which was remarkable. His first commanding officer handed him the battery and then left the very next day. On December 19th, 1944, Herb Stern's division arrived at the Battle of the Bulge, and in freezing fog, Herb drove to the highest ground he could find and identified a crossroads and registered the guns. 10 battalions followed. That's 120 tubes. The German advance was stopped, and he earned the Silver Star. In late 1945, outside of Salzwedel, Herb and his men liberated a concentration camp holding 3,000 women. After the war, he attended the French War College in Paris and worked on a classified study for President Eisenhower. And then he served across NATO, Turkey, and Iran. He retired as a colonel in 1968 with 27 years in uniform. Colonel Herb Stern is 107 years old. He's West Point's oldest living graduate and the last surviving member of the class of 1941. His call sign is Dockyard Six. He still answers to it, and I'm grateful to Colonel Stern for his time, and to Frank Hall and Buck Coates at Falcons Landing for helping make this conversation happen. This is the Oak Lines. Over to Dockyard Six.
Welcome to the Oak Lines, where veteran stories find new roots and our community helps them write their next chapters. I'm Ted Adair, a U.S. Army veteran and founder of the Oath and Oak. It's a gathering place and a storytelling platform built in Leesburg, Virginia. We share stories of veterans finding purpose in service, business, creativity, family, and community. Each one a new way forward. At Oath and Oak, we believe service doesn't end when the uniform comes off. It just takes new forms. Through conversations, through events and workshops, we dig into how creativity, community, and emerging technology help veterans shape what comes next. And we savor each story along the way. This is the Oak Lines. Stay rooted. Find your outpost.
This is the Oak Lines, and the concept is to help veterans chart their path to their next career, whatever they're going to do after they've served the country. I start off with a segment called Net Call. What was your favorite call sign that you had in the service?
Dockyard Six.
Where did the call sign Dockyard Six come from?
That was my radio call sign during the war. I don't know how it was originated, but I've used it. I use it today, believe it or not.
Many of us have an affinity for those call signs because there's deep tradition that goes with it. And there's also a sentiment when you hear it, it connects you to your fellow soldiers, to people that you served with. I start off with that question because it lets us introduce you. Yes, you're Dockyard Six, but you are also, whether you like it or not, West Point's oldest graduate living. You are, sir, a combat veteran many times over. You are a Silver Star recipient. You speak fluent French. You attended the French War College. You spent time in your career not only in the Battle of the Bulge, but later serving with NATO and then serving over in Indochina. You also spent time in Turkey along your career. But all of that started with your time in Baltimore.
I left Baltimore. I was 6.
So Rockville really is truly home. Yeah.
Yes. The family was in Baltimore, and my mother was ill. And her doctor said, "Oh, my dad, get her out of this polluted city." And my dad was in the hardware and building materials business. And he considered Charleston, West Virginia, and Rockville, primarily because Rockville was close to both families who lived in Baltimore, my mother's family and my father's family.
And family seems to be very important. I read somewhere that before you left for your deployment overseas, you had dinner with your dad the night before.
Yes. Before we got on board ship, I had dinner with my dad in New York.
Did he have any advice for you before you left?
He just told me to be careful.
That's exactly what my dad said. My dad said to me, do your duty, do your job, but don't do anything stupid. I am curious if you could share a moment for you throughout your entire career that best showcased duty, honor, and country
for you?
The thing that stayed with me the longest was do my duty and do it properly. That was really what guided me through all my military career. When I had a job to do, I did it. There was never any hesitation. And I did it as fast as possible.
Do you think that was an attribute that you had before you went to the academy, or did it pour water on it and make it stronger?
I was 18 years old when I went to the academy. I didn't really know much.
Or any other core lessons from your time as a cadet that you applied? Certainly do your duty.
No, that really carried me through 28 years in the Army. And I think it carried me through all my life. When it had something to do it. And do it as well as possible and as rapidly as possible.
Did you find West Point, or did West Point find you?
I wanted to go to West Point from the time I was 9 years old.
Do you even recall the first moment you heard the word West Point? Did you have a family member over in?
I just cannot recall that.
It's a special place, and I'm certain that you are thrilled with the decision to go there, because I understand that the Naval Academy might have been in the equation.
Well, I had an appointment to the Naval Academy, but I was only 40 miles away from the academy, and I knew that if I went to the Naval Academy, my mom and dad would be there every week.
So not quite General MacArthur's mom living with.
I was an only son, and I had to get out in the world.
That's right.
When I reported for duty, my first duty station, I went to flight training, which I flunked, and I went back to my basic branch, the artillery, before going to Fort Sill. And I reported to the 8th Division Artillery Headquarters and found out that I was assigned to Headquarters Battery. So I reported the Headquarters Battery to a captain who was in command. He happened to be out of class of 39. And he said, "Welcome, Lieutenant, goodbye." I said, "What do you mean, goodbye?" He said, "I'm the only officer in the battery. You're now the battery commander." He said, "I'm leaving tomorrow."
I suppose you had to make friends and connections real fast to figure out, okay, which way is up? What are we focused on? What are the priorities?
The 8th Division was Regular Army Division. I was the only officer in the battery, and I learned how to command from my first sergeant and my warrant officer.
My sense is that you experienced the same thing that I did, which were you had very experienced senior NCOs who have been doing the job for a long, long time. And even though you're a younger officer, you forge a bond and you forge a connection if you're doing leadership correctly.
I had not been to SIL. I didn't know diddly about running a battery, but I learned, and I had to learn fast.
Those lessons, it sounds like, really helped you later as you were in Louisiana doing training, and then ultimately as you move forward into the Battle of the Bulge. Can you share a little bit about the preparation time that it took to get trained up and ready, and training the unit?
As I say, I had command of the Headquarters Battery of the 8th Division Artillery, and an inspection team of General Hildring and Colonel Barrett. General Hildring had been designated as the division commander of a new division to be activated. And Colonel Barrett, who had been head of the language department at West Point, was his chief of staff. They came to see what a regular Army division was like, and they visited all units as they could in the 8th Division. And after about the second or third day, I got a telephone call from Colonel Barrett, and he said, "Would you meet me in your parking lot?" I said, "Well, I wonder what I've done." He said, 5 o'clock. I said, "Okay." So I met Colonel Barrett in the parking lot, and he says, "Lieutenant," he says, "General Hildring and I are going to the new 84th Division." He said, "We've been inspecting the 8th Division, and we found very little meaningful training going on." He said, "Your battery was one of the few that was doing anything proper." He said, "General Hildring would like you to come to the 84th Division." He said, "Will you approach your division artillery commander?" So I approached my division artillery commander and got a strong no. And shortly after that, we were designated to go to Fort Sill because of school troops. So I'm at Fort Sill, and orders come through transferring me to the 84th Infantry Division. Well, my division artillery commander called me in and ran up one side and down the other, accusing me of arranging this. And I said, his name was General Pickering. I said, General, I had nothing to do with it. I said, but you know, General Hildring is the G1 of the Army. I said, he went back and issued orders on me without anybody approving it. He never forgave me.
Meanwhile, you didn't do anything in that scenario to orchestrate that.
It had nothing to do with it.
I would say that your attention to the need for training certainly had a little bit that you were doing the right thing.
Well, we were
So no good deed goes unpunished, I guess, is one way to view that.
And I stayed with the 84th Division until the time they were sent back.
I'm curious what your thoughts are of your experience in Lawton, Oklahoma, when you were a young lieutenant and captain.
I missed taking the basic course. I never had the basic artillery course. And when I reported to Fort Jackson after flight training, I was at Fort Jackson 3 days when they sent me back to Sill to take the communications course. It was the only course available, and they wanted me to get some education. So that's why I went to headquarters battery when I came back. But I finished communication course and then came back and took over headquarters battery. The next course at Sill that I took was the advanced course, which was a 3-month course. And really, that's where I learned artillery. No gunnery until I got to the advanced course. And then I got plenty.
More than you bargained for.
Well, no, but it certainly was useful.
So I want to take you back a bit in time, just as you're getting ready to both enter the academy and then graduate. And any of those 4 years there, did you have a sense that a full-scale world war would be on the horizon?
Yes, we're really building up. And we knew that we were going to be involved.
As a cadet there, where would you get your information from? Just the local papers, the Times, the
New York. Everybody got the New York Times. And we were following what was happening in Europe very closely.
So you go through Fort Sill, and then from there, I believe you spend time in Louisiana doing high-intensity training in preparation for future deployment to England.
We were stationed at Camp Claiborne in Louisiana. There's an event that happened at Claiborne, paid off in the future. The S3 of the 325th Field Artillery Battalion. And the range at Claiborne was really limited. We weren't really getting much use out of it. And I heard that there was a moving target artillery range at Fort Polk, which was 40 to 50 miles away. So I went to the battalion commander and I said, look, let's take crews over there and get them trained on direct fire. No, that's not necessary. We're not going to run into anything like that. And he just wouldn't agree. Well, I kept after it. Every time I saw him, I'd bring it up. And finally, he said, Herb, you're a pest. He said, take what you want and get over there and get this thing over with. So I took 2 guns, all the gun crews, 12 gun crews.
105 millimeter?
105, towed. And I took the battery execs and the battery commanders, and we went to Fort Polk for 3 days. And fired on moving targets. They had an armored unit at Polk, so they had this range was primarily for them, but we used it. Let's go fast forward a year and a half. I'm now commanding a groupment of 2 artillery battalions, the 325th and the 909th. We're in direct support of the lead infantry regiment as we march across Germany. I'm with the lead unit. I'm with the regimental commander. And I've been leapfrogging the battalions, the 2 artillery battalions, to maintain close support. All of a sudden, I get a radio call. So I ordered my battalion to displace to a pre-designated area. About 15 minutes later, I get a radio call. We've been hit by a German armored unit while we're on the road. We're unhitching the guns and we're going into direct fire. This was the battalion exec calling me. And I said, well, they know what to do. I'm on my way back. So I got back there, and they had cornered this German armored unit in a wooded area. I don't remember exactly how many vehicles they knocked out. They knocked out some armored cars and a couple of tanks and several other items. We lost all of our ammunition, all of our gasoline. We had ammunition trucks on fire, and some of my officers were smart enough to back them up into a nearby river on fire. We had no casualties. We did have 3 men captured. We lost all of our mail. Meanwhile, I called the division commander, and I told him what the situation was. And I said, please send me an infantry battalion so I can get my battalion out of here. I said, I've got a support mission I've got to fill. So he said, I'll have an infantry battalion on the way immediately. He said, you hold out as long as you can. The German unit was in a wooded area. We had no armor-piercing ammunition, and they had run out of high explosive. All they had was armor-piercing. They did a hell of a lot of damage with that armor-piercing, and we didn't do too much damage.
The high explosive, I can't imagine. Maybe at that moment in time, a VT fuse would have come in handy, but I don't think you had that capability.
It was after VT, but this was not a place of VT. So finally, the infantry battalion began to come in. I left one battery there and moved the rest of the battalion into the next position. The division commander, from that point on, until even after the war, recommended the 325th of a presidential unit citation. Eventually, it was turned down, the reason being insufficient casualties.
Sir, I want to take you from that moment to my understanding from the Battle of the Bulge is that you decided to register the guns in advance of an engagement and that was a critical decision.
So the Bulge broke on the 16th of December. We were there on the 19th. They picked up the whole division and moved it from Germany to Belgium. We were in position outside the city of Marsh. Incidentally, I never saw my battalion commander. He was never with us. He was always with the infantry. He lived with the infantry. So the battalion was in my hands. So we had set our CP and Fire Direction Center in the cellar of a chateau outside Marsh. The count who owned the chateau had taken off for Brussels to help the resistance. However, his wife and daughter were living in the upper stories of this chateau. We were down in the cellar, and I got a telephone call from the battalion commander. Have you registered? And observers could not see anything. It was foggy, and, the weather was terrible. Every 5 minutes, I got a telephone call. Have you registered? No. Finally, I got so upset. I said, what's the next time he called? I said, no, but I'm going out and register myself. He said, don't you leave the CP. So I got in my Jeep and I took off. And I found the highest point that I could get to. And after I was there for maybe 15 minutes, I could identify a crossroad in the valley in front of us. So I sent back the fire commands, and the rounds are on the way. 2 rounds hit behind me by 50 yards. And so my assistant S3 was in the Fire Direction Center, and I said, hey, I'm up high, convert to high-angle fire. Sure. So we actually registered on that crossroad. That night, a German armored force came through that crossroad. I brought in 10 battalions, with the corrections transferable, 10 battalions on that crossroad. And some people claim that stopped the advance in the Battle of the Bulge. I can't verify that. We brought in 10 battalions.
To 10 battalions worth of artillery is
120 guns.
It's 120 tubes. So I want people to appreciate the magnitude of steel that is going downrange. But you picked certainly that crossroads, I would imagine, if I'm in your shoes, because you've got line of sight and you're like, okay, I need something that's visible, something that I can verify. So when those initial rounds, did you have any inkling that would have been an enemy point of ingress or a point of entry?
No. There's a book published by one of the infantry company commanders called the Man Company K. He witnessed this artillery barrage when all the battalions were brought in, and he writes about it in this book about how many explosions there were.
I've certainly, and as you have seen high explosive up close and personal, I can only imagine what the Germans were experiencing at that moment. But yeah, whether it was gut instinct or just happenstance that you picked that point, it's a testament to you going on the hand mic and saying, no, I'm going to go out and I'm going to register the guns now.
Yeah, well, after this happened, then we started to close the ball.
What do you remember most of that experience in terms of the men you served with?
I think, first of all, they were well trained. I think we had the best artillery battalion in the Army.
And you commanded 2 artillery battalions simultaneously.
Well, that was when we were hit by the armored force. They had formed a group of 2 battalions, my battalion, the 325th, and the 909th. And when you form a groupment, the organic commander is the commander.
That's right.
I was a major, and the other battalion was commanded by a lieutenant colonel. But he was the most cooperative officer I ever ran into. I had faith in these other units. I knew the commanders because we had trained together as a division.
I think that human connection and being together and in person, it's the relationships I think are the most important out of all of this.
There were very few regular officers available. We were limited. For example, the division artillery was authorized 5 regular officers. So all the rest we were dealing with were reserves and National Guard officers. And they were great people.
I think I understood that later in your career, you assisted with making sure that reserve and guard officers were able to retain their commission, or was there some interaction with senators later on? Maybe I've got that mixed up.
No, you're talking about Redwood Commission. In 1992, Senator Sam Nunn kicked off at the Army, or at the services, passed lead-free forced legislation through the Congress that graduates in the service academies would hereafter receive reserve commission. Well, if that's true, why have the service academy? So, and their 51st or 2nd reunion at West Point, I had read about this and I was really upset about it. So I got up and I proposed that we, the class, my whole class, oppose this legislation and request the services to oppose it. That resolution was passed and passed on to the services and the academies. And I hate to say this, but they would not agree with us. They would not do anything. I had proposed a committee to look into this. So, of course, I was on the committee, and the other 2 members were 2 lieutenant generals, Ed Rowney and Jack Norton. And finally, Lapis graduation, President George Bush was the graduation speaker. And when they presented the diplomas, it was announced that so-and-so is hereby commissioned an ensign in the Naval Reserve. And after this, President Bush said, "What's this reserve profanity?" And superintendent told it that they were required to issue reserve. So he said, well, that's not fair. So we grabbed that and we made an appointment. He said, if you will permit distinguished military graduates to have regular commission, I'll agree. I'll support it. We said, easy. We agreed. And from then on, it was pretty simple, except for the Army. The Army was just tough. And it took on a lieutenant general, G1, who was not a graduate of the service academy, to break the Army into it. And incidentally, this general was killed when the Pentagon was struck.
General Maud.
Yes, General Maud.
Oh,
And he arranged us getting regular commissions restored to the academies. 3 classes actually were issued reserve commissions.
I'm curious, when somebody comes to you and says, thank you for your service, what is your typical, do you have a response, and what's your true response to it?
here.
I think I've heard other veterans use the phrase, America is worth it. I've heard other veterans say, my honor, and thank you for your support.
Well, the people of this country deserve it, as well as the country.
What was your personal experience of transitioning from the military? Were you prepared?
When I left the Army, because my family really wanted me to come in and take over my dad's business, I wasn't excited about it, but he threatened to sell it that he had built up over a period of 50 years, and I just couldn't let him do that. I came into the family business, and we were doing very well. My dad was up in years, and he felt that the business was putting too much of a strain on me, and he decided we'd better get rid of it. So we sold the business to a national corporation, and I was part of the sale. I went with it.
Your sense of duty that we talked about earlier came into play again.
Well, I just couldn't let my dad do that. And I went with the new corporation. I stayed with them for 5 years, and I was very disappointed. I didn't like business ethics. They were completely different from mine and what I'd been taught. It was a different world. And I just decided enough was enough. I wasn't going to put up with it anymore, so I retired for a second time.
I'm glad that you were able to honor your family, honor your dad's wishes, but also know what was right for you in that moment. And I think that's important for other veterans to hear.
Well, I'll tell you, it's a different world. Standards, sometimes there are no standards. The company I was with, that I eventually ended up with after we sold the family business, was, as I say, a national corporation. I was shocked at the way they operated. I questioned their honesty. Their ethics just weren't the same ethics that I had been taught. So I just left.
The veterans that I associate with, we are working to intentionally make strong bonds with the local community, downtown Leesburg in that area, to forge all of those important relationships so that when veterans hang up the uniform, they've got a network of mentors, peers, and can help shine a light. I'd love to spend a little bit of time asking you about your time overseas in Turkey, in Indochina. What stands out from those assignments for you?
I was in GCS.
Joint Chiefs of Staff.
I was the Army member of the Joint Advanced Study Group, and I'd been there 2 years, which was the normal tour, when President Eisenhower asked the Joint Chiefs if he could borrow the 4 of us for a special project. So for the next year, we worked for President Eisenhower on a project that had to have his personal approval for clearances. And the project took about a year. I did not discuss the details. The project took about a year, and we went over to the White House to make the final presentation. I happened to be one of the briefers. There were 2 briefers, and I was the one of them. It was so highly classified that only 3 people were allowed in the briefing room. General Goodmaster, the chairman, and John Eisenhower. And after we briefed the president, the chairman asked the president, what should we do with this? This is so highly classified, we can't distribute it. And the president said, these young men, and I appreciated that, can present this to the chiefs and the secretary, but they cannot ask any questions. So we scheduled a briefing in the tank for all the chiefs, the secretaries, the undersecretaries.
If I could, sir, the tank is a special meeting room that all of the senior leaders of the Joint Chiefs get together, and it's where all of the critical decisions are discussed.
The officer who did the first part of it did his presentation, and my turn came. And I'm in the middle of mine, And General Mace stands up. He says, I am not going to listen to this bull. No. And he walked out. All the other chiefs tried to talk him into coming back in, and he wouldn't do it. And so I went on and finished my presentation. And about 2 days later, I get a telephone message. The Army Chief of Staff wants to see you. And I said, oh, what happened now? So I walked down to General Lemnister's office, and I was a little wary of what was going to happen. And his exec was sitting outside, and I said, you're going to go in with me, aren't you? He said, no, General Lemnister wants to see you alone. So I walk in, and General Lemnister is sitting there in the blue uniform. And he says, I've just come back from the White House. He said, I want to find out, how in the hell did you manage that study? He said, that is the best study I've ever heard come out of the Joint Staff.
High praise. Did you anticipate that someday I'm going to be briefing the president? No big deal. And it's going to be highly classified.
Well, I liked those jobs. They were tough, but I enjoyed that. I liked the hard work.
How did you find General Eisenhower? My understanding is he preferred, even in retirement after being president, that General Eisenhower was always the... How did you find him?
You're leading me to another story.
All right. Let's giddy up.
I had a letter finding me in dereliction of duty, signed Dwight D. Eisenhower.
Oh.
You would have got the time for this?
Yes, sir. I wouldn't, you couldn't peel me out of this chair right now.
We were sitting on the Rhine River. My battalion commander was on 10-day vacation to the Riviera, and we were firing across the Rhine at target. And I had established in one of these big flak towers, and we had a 40 crew in the flak tower, and we were getting more fire missions. Really, it was unreasonable. So I said, there aren't that many targets across the river. We were right across from the city of Duisburg.
Okay.
And I said, there's something funny. And I knew that if I went if they saw me coming, whatever was funny would be corrected. I said, later this evening, will you send a crew down to this city and find out what's going on? That happened, and they found my 3-man crew living there with 3 German women. So I relieved them immediately. I was the battalion commander at that time. I reduced the 2 enlisted men, and I preferred charges against the lieutenant who was a forward observer. About 3 days later, I get a telephone call from General Barrett now, who is the division artillery commander. And he says, Major, he says, you really don't want to court-martial this officer, do you? I said, yes, sir, I do. He said, I think you ought to withdraw the charges. I said, no, General, I want to court-martial him. I said, it's your prerogative to remove the charges if that's your decision. I said, but I'm not changing my mind. He removed the charges. In all military cases of fraternization, went directly to General Eisenhower.
Wow.
I get a letter finding me in dereliction of duty for failing to court-martial the offending officer. So I get a telephone call from General Barrett. He said, I guess you've gotten this letter. I said, yes, sir. He said, I am going to write them and tell them that I'm the one that withdrew the charges, which he did. General Barrett was a real fine officer. I sent him the the letter and withdrawn. Well, that would have been the end of my career.
Sure.
After the war, I go to Washington, go down to look at my records, and there's that letter. And somehow it disappeared during that session.
So a couple of lessons there. One, General Barrett did right by you and certainly did the right thing. You held to your convictions. Was it a real shock when you saw the signature on the letter? I mean, it would have taken me about 10 steps back.
I said, if this stands, I'm through.
Yeah. I don't suppose that when you were briefing the president, you got a chance to mention that. That's probably not the time and the place to bring something like that up.
I was saying he didn't recognize.
So clearly you weren't that much in dereliction. Where did you pick up French? And then how did your language ability influence your career?
It was Academy French.
So straight.
I liked French. West Point.
Yeah.
It's one of the few subjects I did well in.
And that came into play later on in your career.
Well, as a matter of fact, there were 3 American officers at the War College. Colonel Barksdale Hamlet, Colonel Woody Stromberg, who was an All-American in 36, and me. Stromberg and I were from the theater, and the other officer was from the United States. He had been selected in the U.S. At the end of the course, Woody Stromberg and I each delivered a lecture in French to the student body.
So this is in Paris at the French War College.
It was a hardship tour.
Out of all of the cities that you experienced, well, really in your total career, which ones did you love the most? Is Paris? Paris is up there.
I spent a lot of time in Paris in addition to the year I was there at school. When I was in Think South in the NATO command, I was in Paris 1 month and in Germany the next month. Well, I spent a lot of time in Eastern Turkey. I spent a lot of time in Iran.
Yeah.
When I was in the Simple Treaty Organization, I spent a lot of time there because I was responsible for the defense planning and the combined military planning staff. And I traveled through a lot of Iran.
Did you pick up any?
3 weeks in the field there.
The desert heat it's not forgiving. It is not fun. Did you pick up any Farsi while you were there? No, not a bit.
I took a group of Turkish officers and Iranian officers, and we spent 3 weeks in the field following the trace of the Scent Railway. Turkey and Iran had been neighbors for many years, and they had not crossed their common border. So I took them to the border, and then there was a big ceremony between the Turkish officials and the Iranian officials to celebrate this crossing of the border, this meeting at the border between Iran and Turkey.
Was there any document? Did anybody take photos or document or video any of this at the time? Unbelievable. I want to ask you what you think keeps you sharp and focused and curious.
I guess I was natural curiosity of what was going on in each one. I had so many experiences during and after, right after the war. Regular officers could not come home.
Yeah.
When the divisions were returned, if you were a regular officer, you had to stay in the theater. And so you had 3 years. So we all went to different units. I luckily escaped and got assigned to the French War College, or else I would have gone to a quartermaster unit, which is what I was assigned to. And they didn't care what your branch was. And after I finished War College, I went to the 60th Field Artillery in the 9th Infantry Division, and with 2 lieutenant colonels in the battalion. And we split up occupational duties, got along just fine, but we were both busy. Most of the time was spent getting displaced people back to their countries and out of the camps. That was when my tour ended. I returned to the States.
So I know I'm jumping around your career and your vast experiences. One moment I forgot to ask you about was I know that you and team liberated a camp in Germany, a concentration camp.
We were moving toward the Elbe, and we came to the town of Salzwedel, and you could smell it as you entered the town. You could smell it. And my Jeep stopped at a high fence, an area that was fenced in. And we looked in there, and there were emaciated women inside this place. There were 3,000 Jewish women in this place being used as slave labor. We opened the camp and released the women. I'm telling you, it was really sad. But they just went right through the town of Salzwedel, grabbing grain and eating grain and then drinking, and the grain swelling up. And it was really a mess. But the division assembled all these women and put them in a German military hospital that we had taken over. And by that time, my battalion had reached the Elbe River, and I decided to go back and see what happened to all these women. So I drove back to this hospital. You wouldn't recognize them. They had gotten decent food, decent medical care, and they were different people. We were the northernmost American unit. And when the war ended, we had to move south to the American zone. And this took some time. We moved a few miles each day. And when we went into an area, the commanding officer, that was me, was responsible for any concentration camp or DP camp or POW camp in the area, and also the villages. We had to screen the civilian officials in the villages. I also had a 3-man team attached to the battalion to interview the German officials and so forth. And if they were found to have had Nazi association, I was authorized to remove them and appoint their replacement. I didn't know diddly about government. There was one interesting event that took place. In one of our moves, there was a slave labor camp that I was responsible for. So I took my sergeant major, and he and I went to this camp. And we got to the gate of this camp, and a Russian lieutenant was the camp commander. And he says, "You can't come in here. You don't have any authority in this area." I said, "I do have authority in the area. I'm the commanding officer of this area. Open the gate." And he opened the gate. And the sergeant major and I went through this camp, and it was disgraceful. It was these low buildings, tar paper buildings, and it was filthy, and the families all mixed up and so forth. So I got hold of this Russian lieutenant. I said, "This is a disgrace." It was also a health problem.
Hazard, yeah, for sure.
I give you 24 hours. I want this place cleaned up, and I want you to separate the families. I said, if you have to hang blankets to form sections where you can house the family, you do that. I said, but I'll be back in 24 hours. So my sergeant major and I came back in 24 hours. And he said, before I left, he said, "I'm not going to do that." And it's the only time in my career I ever pulled a pistol on anybody. I took my pistol and held it up to his head. I said, "You do that or I pull the trigger." So that apparently convinced him. So I came back the next day, and the place was different. He had cleaned up most of the mess. He hung blankets to form areas for families. But there were dead bodies. There were people who had passed away, and they would not bury them. They left them wrapped up in the ground and on the grounds, and they would not bury these people. So I had to send a crew in at night to get the bodies and bring them out and bury them. And I was glad to get out of this area. I had some time with the Russians before. When we were up on the Elbe River, we were told we could not cross the river. So that was a signal for us to cross. My battalion, incidentally, had been ready to cross the river when we hit the Elbe. And we were 51 miles from Berlin. And I had my battalion in the assembly area, engines running, when we were called off and told, "Do not cross the river." I found a railroad, and I took my S2 and my assistant S2. We left our pistols, our rings, our watches, everything in the unit. We rode across the river to spend some time with the Russians. And we visited a courtyard where they were taking care of their horses. The Russians were using both armor and horses together. One of the best, most effective maneuvers I've ever seen. But they were drinking out of these 5-gallon cans. They were all toasting with a sort of a purplish liquid. And I said to one of my officers, I said, "They're drinking gasoline." He said, "No, that's probably green vodka." So, of course, when we walked in there, he handed each one of us a mug. I said, "I'm not going to drink it." No. So I was wearing a tank jacket. And when I tipped the mug up, I just let it run down the front of my jacket. 2 weeks later, there was no nap in that jacket.
Yeah, the Russian alcohol is very, very strong stuff.
All right, sir, 5-minute fire mission. We're on the clock. What is one thing you would want the American public to understand about veterans and military service?
Well, I don't think people really understand the military or what the military has accomplished. They've really protected the Republic.
All right. Next round is tell me the name of or a person who has been a role model for you or a mentor and what lessons you took from them. And you can say check, fire, pass.
I'll tell you, I work for a lot of generals, and I think the one that I really appreciated was General Earl Wheeler, who was chairman of the Joint Chiefs. He was an outstanding officer, and I enjoyed working for him.
And was there a lesson that he imparted on you or something about his leadership qualities that you admired?
Well, I thought he was a great leader. I only knew him when he was in leadership positions. I worked for him briefly in NATO, and I worked for him for 2 years in the Joint Chiefs when he was director, but I really admired him.
When you think about your time at West Point, what are the key defining lessons that you learned?
I learned so much. I was 18 years old. I didn't know much, but I learned that your word is your honor, and you have got to live with that in mind. The words of duty and honor really are the important things you get out of the academy.
Well, sir, this has been my honor to spend some time with you, to hear all of these incredible life experiences. As a fellow veteran, we are just grateful to spend this time with you today.
Thank you for listening.
Hey, sir, one other quick thing for you. I did sneak this in. My son wanted to see if you would be willing to just hold this up for a photo, or if you're cold, if your head is cold, feel free to put it on, but it's our family standard Beat Navy hat.
I'd like you to know that this is the second best birthday celebration I've had. I know some of you have heard about the best, but I'm going to repeat it. The best birthday was my 26th birthday in 1944 in the 84th Infantry Division. The division had been moved out of Germany to Belgium to stop the penetration by the Germans, which later became known as the Battle of the Bulge. We had set up our headquarters and fire direction center in the chateau just outside the city of March, which was the German objective. The count that owned the chateau had taken off for Brussels to join the resistance, but his wife and a 16-year-old daughter remained in the chateau, living in one of the upper floors. We had established our fire direction center in the cellar late in the afternoon of the 24th of December, 1944. We were in the process of preparing protective fires for our infantry for the evening. And there was a knock on the door of the room that we occupied as the fire direction center, and someone opened the door, and there was the Countess with a big bowl of mulled wine and the daughter with a tray of glasses. After we finished the wine, the Countess came over to me and said, "Major, will you please follow me?" I had no idea why I should follow her, but I did. And she led me to one of the upper floors in the chateau, and we came to this closed door. And she said, "Major, this is your birthday present, happy birthday." She opened the door, and there was a bathtub full of water. And that is the best birthday I've ever had. Thank you, Lord.
Thanks for joining us on the Oak Lines. Follow Oath and Oak on Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook, and subscribe to our YouTube channel at the Oak Outpost. Stay rooted, find your outpost.